I don't have a open DM with JSF, so I figured you could just pass it on to him.
Yeah, okay, cool.
I'm not passing anything to him. We're not even friends.
It's a strictly professional relationship. So when the whole thing collapses, we can just walk away from it.
Who gets the YouTube plaque for 1 million subs?
You'll get joint custody of it.
Yeah. Hi, Richie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, everyone. We have
Hi,
a very...
Sin.
No, not yet. This is a surprise. We have a very special guest with us today.
Who is it?
Who are you, special guest?
Hi, I'm Alhazred. How are you doing?
Welcome, Alhazred. And you've been on the Snap Covenant before to talk about Blood Omen?
Yes, I have.
And now you're back to talk about the mysterious pillars. And if people were to find you somewhere online, where would they look for you?
I am most active on Twitter at TC_Alhazred, and I also stream off and on Twitch, which is Alhazred's Gaming Goo. That is also the name of my YouTube channel, but that's kind of dead at the moment, so yeah, don't bother, just go to Twitch.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about the Pillars of Nosgoth. And before we start, legacyofkain.fandom.com is a really good resource for Legacy of Kain lore. And it talks about a lot of things we'll talk about today. So if you're like a fan of Legacy of Kain, feel free to check it out. It's really good.
Yep.
Okay. Richard, do you know anything about the Pillars of Nosgoth?
I know more than I did before, because I went to legacyofkain.fandom.com and read about them.
And this is why we have Alhazred here with us today, because like Soul Reaver, Blood Omen, and Legacy of Kain runs through his veins.
Because I'm a fanboy.
I asked Autumn about this, and she said they keep the Hilden in another dimension, I think.
No, Richie! We're supposed to build up to it!
Spoilers!
This game is like older than some of the people listening to this.
Oh my god, it is.
Well, okay, no, hang on. There's an important question I have to ask you that I don't know the answer to. Are we going over the Pillars of Nosgoth in historical sequence of events, or are we going over them in the order that you get them in the games, because the games take place out of chronological order?
We're going over them in the order that I made up, which is a mystery order.
Okay.
Thank you, Richie. Okay. So, the Pillars of Nosgoth are more than just a human edifice. The spiritual and physical health of the land is tied inexplicably to the
Inextricably. Did you write this, or did you get this from the wiki?
Which one's less embarrassing? Go with that one.
I think it's a little bit of both. Okay. Let's do this again.
Okay.
The Pillars of Nosgoth are more than just a human edifice. The spiritual and physical health of the land is tied to the pillars' well-being. The 9 ancient pillars represent the principle of mind, dimension, conflict, nature, energy, time, states, death, and at the center, binding them all together, balance.
Are you going to be the new narrator?
Maybe.
Just skipping over words because you don't know how to pronounce it. And in the middle, balance.
Tony J passed away some years ago,
He
so
did,
if they ever make
yeah.
a new game, it does. We
You
do
can
need
be
a
the
new
Elder
one.
God.
Yeah, yes, in the Elder
Yeah.
God.
Okay, but if I'm the elder god, I'll be like this. Okay, are you ready? I'm in character.
Okay.
Ancient pillars represent the principle.
Also, you remember what the Elder God wanted?
What did he want?
He wanted Raziel to bring him food. It's perfect.
It is. It really is.
Actually, it is. Okay, I feel like we need to start it over.
No, I think it's perfect.
I don't even know where we would start over, though. Richie ruins everything. I made notes. I sent the notes to Alhazred.
Yeah.
Alhazred wrote notes on the notes. We had a perfect system going. And here comes Richie. Richie, did you make any notes?
In my mind.
Did you know what Legacy of Kain was until about 2 hours ago?
Oh, no, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
What's a vampire?
A vampire is a person covered in glitter.
It sounds great. We need to play more of these.
They actually made that joke in the newest version of Vampire the Masquerade too,
Oh dear.
which had me laughing more than is reasonable.
So today we're talking about the Pillars of Nosgoth. Richie,
Yes.
can you read the part in brown that I was supposed to read, but you won't let me read normally, so you're going to read it?
The Pillars of Nosgoth are more than just a human edifice. The spiritual and physical health of the land is tied inextricably to the pillars' well-being. The 9 ancient pillars represent the principles of mind, dimension, conflict, nature, energy, time, states, death, and, at the center, binding them all together, balance.
Thank you, Richie. So, Alhazred, can you
Yes.
tell us more? What are the Pillars of Nosgoth?
Okay, so all we really know at the beginning is that they are kind of in a field in a somewhat forested area that looks different in every game. Although if you look at the world maps, they are always consistently in kind of the southwest part of Nosgoth.
Mm-hmm.
There's the 8 of them are arranged in sort of a crescent shape on the back of a really large pedestal, and the pillar of balance is in front of them and centered. And they're all the pedestal is like very shiny, polished marble, and the pillars themselves look like they're made of marble. And when they're not horribly decaying because something's gone horribly wrong, they are also like pretty white marble.
Mm-hmm. Did you just say horribly decaying?
Oh, yes, totally.
Get it? Richie, did you
Yeah.
get it?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
It's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whose idea was to get her a soundboard?
I'm ruining things, but you can have a soundboard.
Well, welcome to life.
Do I get a soundboard?
I am the elder god, and I am the master of the soundboard.
Okay.
You have to bring her enough snacks, and she'll open a portal to the soundboard for the rest of us.
There we go. Okay. Anything else you'd like to add, Alhazred?
I think that's about all that can be said for the description. Oh, except for the fact that the emblems that show which pillar represents which theme, as it were, actually changes between games. They're kind of very easy to understand pictographs in Blood Omen, like Pillar of Conflicts. In the middle of it, there's a picture of like 2 crossed swords, and the Pillar of the Mind looks like a piece of brain has been removed and inserted into the pillar. But in all the other games, they replace those with these kind of generic-looking runes.
Mhm.
I assume because maybe in full 3D it would have looked silly.
Is there like an actual runic alphabet that Nosgoth uses? Because I remember in Soul Reaver, all the vampire lords had like a rune associated with them.
I remember reading about one for Blood Omen. I might be imagining that, but I was too lazy to like translate any of it myself, and I never found any like big convenient database of it, so I never bothered looking any of it up. But I assuming I'm not completely imagining that, I believe Blood Omen had like actual things written out in runes and on some walls. And stuff.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Alhazred, let me ask you. Do we encounter the pillars in every single game?
We do, but in Blood Omen 2, they're only seen in the intro cinematic, because outside of that, the entirety of Blood Omen 2 takes place in a single city somewhere else in Nosgoth called Meridian, which confusingly also seems to imply that Nosgoth is not the world, but just a country or a continent that the city is the capital of.
Blood Omen 2 seems to be a little bit of a mess lore-wise and game-wise.
A bit, just a tad.
Defiance came after Blood Omen 2. So why didn't they make it like in the beginning of Defiance, like Kain wakes up and he's like covered in cold sweat and he's like, "Ooh, that was just a dream, thank God."
I think they made a conscious decision for whatever reason that they were going to use Defiance to try to make Blood Omen 2 make sense, because just like I couldn't imagine the motivation there, because what you just said would have been a much preferable alternative. But quite a lot of Blood Omen 2 is just like, this is why that nonsense from Blood Omen 2 happened, and here's an explanation from it. Even a lot of the stuff that had to be cut to meet the deadline in Defiance was stuff that was supposed to explain nonsense in Blood Omen 2, like why Vorador was suddenly alive again.
I read the wiki and I was actually impressed at how little of it seemed to be like that, because my memory of the series, having played it as like a teenager, is that it was like, it felt all over the place and they were using time travel to explain why parts of it didn't make sense. But having gone back over it, it looks like that's pretty much just confined to like 2 of the games that are sort of a mess like that. The time travel stuff, like I mentioned this the first time, but when I first played Soul Reaver, I assumed that the time travel stuff was just left over from that old Shifter game, and they needed to bring it in to like explain why this game was a sequel that didn't feel like a sequel. But no, the time travel and all the like all that stuff was always in there. I just didn't remember it. Yeah.
Yeah. Seemed to be like a very well put together series, aside from Blood Omen 2.
I wonder how much of I have wondered how much of Shifter made it into Soul Reaver, aside from the basic concept, because they put a lot of the concept art when it was still Shifter on the disc, and it almost looks like urban fantasy. Like Raziel is on what looks like a modern building, and he's wearing like a leather biker jacket.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was going to take place in the real world or not, but it looked more real world-esque at least.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Richie?
Yes.
Could you scroll down to where it says Guardians?
Yep.
And where it says, Sin will read this part. Could you read it in your best Kain voice?
Oh no.
I don't remember what Kain sounds like.
Can you just go with your gut?
I'll just read it normally.
Oh, how about no?
The Pillars are represented by an oligarchy of sorcery guardians known as the Circle of Nine.
Okay, well, let me re-say it then. Oh, okay, Richie?
Yes.
Could you drop the attitude, little guy? Okay.
Oh, is this the version of JSF that's in your hand?
Yes, yeah, in the microphone or in my hand.
You live in the microphone, you turn to the microphone and you point at it and you wag your finger.
It's true. So, Richie, can you go down to where it says Guardians in the notes?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Okay.
And where it says Sin will read this part, could you read the part I'm supposed to read?
Okay.
Because you're much better at reading than I am.
Okay. The Pillars are represented by an oligarchy of sorcery guardians known as the Circle of Nine. Each guardian is marked from birth, chosen and summoned by the pillar he is destined to serve for his lifetime. In return, the guardians are granted longevity and extraordinary powers. The death of a circle member is inevitably followed by the birth of a successor, whom it is the responsibility of the remaining guardians to seek out and apprentice into the circle.
Thank you, Richie. So, Alhazred, I have a very important question for you.
Yes.
It's something that's bothered me for a while.
I don't know what the Lord Vessel is.
Oh, damn, what a burn. Oh. It's like Rich's shade is rubbing off on you. Okay. How are the Guardians chosen?
Whenever one of the Guardians dies, the corresponding pillar chooses a new Guardian from someone being born into the world at that time. And the last part there is not explicitly said in Blood Omen, but it is explicitly said in the later games.
Okay.
So if you're just going on Blood Omen, you could assume that it could choose from literally anybody in the world, but the later games do establish that it chooses someone when they are born as the old Guardian dies.
Are you going to tell us how they choose them later, more specifically?
That's kind of it. There's no, if there's any criteria or anything, then it's never hinted on. They just choose someone. It might be random. There might be some motive behind it, but if there is, it's never gone into.
So, okay, so how does a pillar choose someone and then communicate that this person is the one that's chosen?
We don't really know that either. It's just known that the circle somehow figures it out at some point. They might have some weird magic that lets them just know it instantaneously, or maybe the pillars just tell them and they get a gut feeling about it.
I just imagine the pillars, but when no one's around, they like open their eyes and they have like giant mouths and they're like, hey, what's up? So who do we choose today? Oh, I don't know.
So again, that's not ruining things, but if I say something, it is.
Oh my god!
You're like Pillar of Nosgoth hand. Anyway, Richie, back to sensible conversations.
We also don't know if the first Guardians were chosen randomly the same way, or if when they were built, they were like sort of programmed to choose specific people to be the first Guardians, and then the other choosing happened as those died. We actually briefly see the original Guardians in Defiance, but we only see their ghosts, and they're not very talkative, so we don't get to like ask them any questions about these things.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a shame because I need answers, and they don't give me any.
It is a shame. So you know how Ariel was stuck with the pillars for a while because she was like a ghost or whatever?
Quite a while, 1,000 years, maybe more.
Do you think she ever put googly eyes on the pillars just to like cheer herself up?
Well, she's a ghost, so I'm not sure how she would make googly eyes. She wouldn't be able to like touch them.
Maybe she could order them on Amazon.
Can ghosts order things on Amazon?
Yeah, why not? Oh my god. Okay, Richie, this reminded me of another emergency podcast we have to do, but
How much of this is going to be cut?
oh, but you'd be good.
Isn't the real question how much of this is going on Patreon?
Thank you, Alhazred. Okay, so can people refuse to be a guardian?
Well, they could refuse to join the circle in theory, but since they're chosen to be the guardian at birth, they can't really refuse that. You don't really have a say in that matter. The pillar is just like, yep, you're the guardian. And then they're not really going to have any idea until the circle comes for them later.
Hmm.
And the circle isn't very nice. The people in it are not very nice, except maybe Ariel. So
Yeah.
it's completely within the realm of possibility that if someone refused, they might just kill them and wait for the next one to grow up anyway, rather than dealing with it.
Damn.
I assume it would be like, what's more effort trying to convince this person to come with us and put on their awesome sorcerer robe, or just killing them and waiting for the next one, and then they'll go with whatever one is less effort.
They sound like an extra evil corporation. It's like, what's more effort, training this person who doesn't want to be trained, or killing them and hiring someone new?
It's the plot of many 80s action movies that were direct to video, I think.
Richard, do you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, we do know something about one of the Guardians, but you told me not to spoil anything, so.
Oh, okay. Well, tell me what it is, and I'll cut it out if it's a spoiler.
That Kain is the Guardian of Balance.
Oh, that's fine. That's not a spoiler.
Well, what is and is not a spoiler to you?
Well, I'll tell you.
Okay.
You tell me what you want to say, and then I'll tell you if it's a spoiler or not.
But is there some logic to this, or is it just...
It's my muse.
Okay.
How long have you been asking that question?
Oh, damn. Shade. Okay, thank you. And can there be more than one guardian per pillar at a time?
Logically there can't be, because a new one won't be chosen until the current one dies.
Okay, and what happens when the current one dies?
Well, we already kind of answered that. The pillar will just choose a new guardian from someone being born into the world at the time.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, there aren't really, like, we don't know a lot more about the choosing process or
Yeah, we don't know if there even is a choosing process, or if it's just like maybe Destiny says that exactly one person is born into the world when one of the guardians dies, and so that's the new guardian.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Okay, so another question I want to ask is, what happens when a guardian goes mad?
So we see what happens when every guardian goes mad at once, and it's that the pillars start decaying. and they have to be killed so the pillars can kind of be rebooted. So we can we can assume from that if just one of them went mad, the rest of the circle who haven't gone mad with them, like what happens in the game, would probably just kill them themselves. So a new guardian could be chosen.
So if the pillars stop working, you have to turn them off and turn them on again.
Yeah, it kind of is like that.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the phrase "serve the pillars," what does that mean? Like, how do the guardians serve the pillars, and what are their responsibilities?
Their only real responsibility is to protect them so that they're not damaged, because if they get damaged, then the land itself also becomes damaged and Nosgoth will start decaying horribly, which is another thing we see happen in multiple stages, no less, throughout the series. But there is dissent among the circle, or at least the incarnation of the circle that we see in game about that, where at least one of them really doesn't see it like that, and he views it more as, oh, we are guardians by divine right. This makes the world our toy to play with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me ask you, Alhazred, can you tell me what is the Circle of Nine?
So all we know in Blood Omen is that they're the sorcerers who are supposed to guard the pillars, and Blood Omen 1 does not really go into detail about how they came to be or any of their backstories, save for the fact that about 30 years before the game takes place, Vorador managed to kill several of them and just shook up the entire thing, and like 5 new guardians needed to be chosen at once. And that was very horrible and left them very disheveled for a while. It's not until we get to really Defiance that we learn that they weren't even made by humans in the first place, and the Circle of Nine is really just this thing that came after that. In itself, they don't even understand what the original purpose of the pillars was.
What?
So they're kind of, they don't really realize it themselves, but they're kind of flying blind as it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Alhazred. So there's a whole convoluted history that happens before the first Blood Omen.
Oh boy.
Could you tell us about it?
So what happens is we find most of this out in Defiance, which is the last game in the series. It's sort of touched on in Blood Omen 2, but it's not really clear or good or well written until Defiance. That the pillars were actually made by the ancient winged race who became the first vampires because they were fighting a war against a species called the Hilden. And the reason they were fighting a war against the Hilden is that their god told them, hey, go kill the Hilden because they won't worship me, and I don't like that. And so they eventually made the pillars as this sort of magical binding machine that would seal the Hilden away in another dimension, which is only referred to as the demon dimension because it's this really hostile place that like physically warps anyone who goes there for extended periods of time. So the Hilden, as we actually eventually see them in Defiance, probably are not what the Hilden used to look like because they've been in the demon dimension for so long. And we don't know if the whole way the pillars are tied into the well-being of the land was intentional, or if that was just a necessary part of how of it was just a thing that had to happen for the ancients to make them and make the binding against the Hilden work. But the main purpose was to bind the Hilden. It didn't have anything to do with with taking care of the land or anything.
Mm-hmm. And initially, the guardians of the pillars weren't human.
No, they weren't. They were also the ancients because they built it in the first place. But they weren't originally vampires. The original guardians might have been vampires the entire time.
From what I read, they were always called vampires, but they weren't vampires as we understand them until after the Hilden situation.
Yeah, I just called them the ancients to make it easier to keep track of in my head. Yeah. Yeah, but the Hilden cursed them with vampirism as they were being banished to the demon dimension. So maybe for a few seconds, the original guardians weren't vampires, but they would have been for the majority of the time they lived anyway. So it's kind of a moot point.
So actually, talk to me more about that. So the Hilden cursed the ancients with vampirism?
Yeah, the god that the ancients worshipped is the elder god, the big thing that's made of tentacles and eyeballs that Raziel really hates and gets snarky with later on. And as we find out, he's not. His whole nature as a deity is a fraud. He's basically this giant parasite who feeds on souls when people die. So when the Hilden cursed the ancients, the bloodlust part of vampirism wasn't really the main point of the curse. The main point of the curse was that it made them immortal, and since they couldn't die normally anymore, the elder god just instantly shunned them and completely gave up on them because, oh, you can't die, therefore I can't eat on you, therefore eat you, therefore I don't care about you anymore.
The cycle goes stagnant because the vampires are they can't die and they're also sterile, so they just sort of hang around.
Yeah, so the immortality was the true nature of the curse. They might have also made them sterile intentionally because that, as we learned later, that causes problems for keeping the pillars going and keeping the Hilden bound to the demon dimension. So that's certainly within the realm of possibility. We actually do see the elder god discuss the ancients a little bit, I think, in Defiance, and he even just calls them the apostates. Because that's the amount of contempt he has for them the second that the Hilden cursed them, even though it wasn't their fault at all, just like went completely through the roof and completely shunned them, to the extent that some of them even killed themselves out of like depression.
Aww. So, if I understand correctly, the Elder God is basically really into war.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Richie taught me about what war is, and now I'm like very happy that I get to recognize it whenever it happens.
You should play Warframe, because the latest Warframe eats people and then spits them back out as projectiles.
Do you mean Warframe?
Yeah, it basically is. It's like Kirby, where he opens this gigantic maw and magically sucks enemies in.
I'm now kind of interested in Warframe, honestly. I wasn't before.
And now when you're carrying enemies around in your stomach before you use them as projectiles or digest them for buffs, you can hear his stomach gurgling. The Warframe is called Grendel. You can just look up Grendel Warframe on YouTube and see him. He also turns into a meatball and rolls around and collides with enemies as a meatball. I'm so not making any.
It displays like Kirby, but is absurdly different.
So there's the Elder God. Is there other gods in the game?
Well, it kind of depends on if you even consider the Elder God a god to begin with, because various characters just outright say you're just a complete fraud.
Elder fraud?
Yeah, basically. No, there's not really any other deities or anything. It's not. We don't know if the demon dimension was inhabited before the Hilden were there either, and Dark Prophecy probably would have touched on that if it hadn't been canceled, because from what I understand, most of the game would have taken place in the demon dimension, and it would have fleshed out the Hilden more.
Okay. So, in a nutshell, the pillars were created to keep the Hilden in the demon realm, and everything is a lie.
Yes.
So this is very much like Portal.
Well, in Portal, only the cake is a lie.
You know what it is like that I thought you were going to say?
What?
Demon Souls.
How so?
Because in Demon Souls, they keep the land together by binding the monumentals to the archstones.
Oh.
And that keeps the old one asleep, and then if you screw with the archstones, the old one wakes up again.
Remember when we were talking about something, I said that Dark Souls is the Soul Reaver-like? Well, now Demon Souls is a Soul Reaver-like as well.
And there is an ancient god that you have to offer souls to.
Uh-huh.
That does explain why so many people in the community are fans of Soul Reaver, I guess.
Definitely on my list of things to do if I ever have crazy billionaire money is to just buy FromSoft so I can make them remake Legacy of Kain as Souls likes. Because of course there is the old joke that you don't play Legacy of Kain for the gameplay, you play it for the story.
Oh, damn. Yeah. I realized something else. Do you know who else is into war?
Go on.
Raziel. He just swallows souls of the everything whole.
I think that's sort of on the borderline though, because if you're like absorbing a soul, it's not the same thing as like being inside someone's stomach.
But no, but remember there are green guys that run around and he just swallows them up.
That's true. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
There's that really hilarious scene in Soul Reaver 2 where Mobius is like, "Oh, woe is me, Raziel. You're in a point in time now where I'm dead, so this is just my wandering spirit talking to you, and you totally have to believe that." And Raziel's just like, "Well, I do have a way to check." And he starts pulling his shawl down, and Mobius suddenly vanishes, and he puts it back up, and he says, "I thought not."
Okay. All right. Awesome. So there were some questions that were asked on Discord, and I'm going to look through them to see if we answered them so far. So Pablo, Bob, Firex, Andre, Paul, 32, and Emlyn had similar questions that had to do with when do we find out the pillar's real purpose and what is the real purpose, which we answered. Pablo also had a question. Are the Hilden carbon-based or silicone-based?
Well, they look so weird they could be silicon-based. And, there's hints of what they looked like before they were banished, and they still didn't look human at all. They definitely had this weird ethereal alien thing going on. That might more be the result of when you talked about Soul Reaver. We actually just mentioned it about the whole thing. How Soul Reaver was originally Shifter, and then they made that the Legacy of Kain sequel, and on and on and on. Blood Omen 2 is even worse because Blood Omen 2 is actually two canceled games mushed together. And that's why Kain looks so completely ridiculous, because Kain in Blood Omen 2 is just the protagonist of one of those two games with the head switched out for Kain. It's the game was Chakin 2, or maybe it's supposed to be Chakin 2.
Oh god.
Yeah, and Kain is just Chakin with a different head. And if you Google that, you'll see concept art of that character, and it looks just Kain.
Yeah. Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
How do you spell that?
Okay, so Chakan the Forever Man. It was was it Genesis or SNES? I think it was Genesis.
Oh god, I don't remember.
Yeah, it was. Okay. Yeah, it was Genesis. It was a game where you were a character who you couldn't die, but the game was on a timer. So you had to get to the end, and death just slowed you down. You were this immortal guy. You were an immortal guy who was trying to die, and you had to get to the end before the time ran out to actually die. And it had a very similar, it's kind of Soul Reaver-esque, bling kind of gothic arenas.
Oh, I see the resemblance body-wise to Kain.
Yeah, so most of the character designs and the design of the city of Meridian is just stuff repurposed from Chakin 2.
Oh no!
And the Hilden city at the end, where the game just goes completely off the rails, and it's like you're now in a sci-fi alien city. Have fun. That's from a completely different game on top of it, the name of which I don't remember what it was going to be. So there's murals there that seem to be what the Hilden may have looked like before they were warped by the demon realm, but we don't know if that was added later when the assets were repurposed, or if that's just what the assets originally looked like. Or maybe it was what the assets originally looked like, but they just decided, that's what the Hilden look like now because we're using these for Legacy of Kain.
Yeah, I'm looking up images of Hilden, and just every single one looks completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some that look like angels, and some that look like people, and some that look like the Zerg from StarCraft.
Yeah, the ones that look like the Zerg are the ones we see directly in Blood Omen 2.
Yes, that'd make sense if they were for Chakan originally.
Yeah.
Well, outside of Blood Omen 2, when we see the Hilden, we almost universally see them possessing people.
Yeah.
So we don't see their true forms. And the kind of the exceptions in Soul Reaver 2, when Raziel gets attacked by a lot of them near the end of the game. And they still all look wildly different from each other, which we presume is because the demon realm just warped them all differently. But there's an electric one, there's a big one with horns, there's one that breathes poison fog at you.
They're individuals, okay?
Yeah, they are.
Well, it's like if you were Hilden and you went to Nosgoth in Raziel's era, it'd be the vampires all look different. There was a giant spider, and there was a giant hunk of meat, and a fish man.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
That's one of the things that can get confusing about the whole series, because in universe there's 3 different ways that vampires are made.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, what are they?
And so, well, there's Kain making his lieutenants by finding old corpses and imbuing them with pieces of his soul, which is why they degrade over time and turn like really gross into the spider and the fishman and all that because they just don't have like very strong souls to hold themselves together. And then there's Mortanius making Kain with Janos Aldrin's heart, because once Janos Aldrin's heart was torn out, it became the Heart of Darkness and was this very powerful vampiric artifact.
Yeah, which is a ripoff of the movie Crank High Voltage.
Right.
Right.
And then there's the ancients were cursed to be vampires by the Hilden, and then they could make vampires the more traditional way by biting people.
Thank you. Most hated asks, are those the things surrounding the hunter's dream?
Yes.
Mystery solved.
It's a much more interesting answer than, oh, there's just other hunters' dreams on top of them, even though there's obviously not.
Shade.
That's what people really saw moving when they thought they saw moving on top of those. They saw Ariel floating around as a ghost.
And that's why they weren't in the old versions of the game, because it wasn't a Legacy of Kain sequel until later on.
Well, oh my god! We have established that Dark Souls is a Soul Reaver-like, Demon Soul is a Soul Reaver-like, Bloodborne is a Soul Reaver-like.
Yep.
We thought that Miyazaki took all his ideas from Berserk.
Yeah.
No.
And he took half of them from Berserk.
Yes. One last question. Art Divinator Arki asks, does Nosgoth have any relation to Russian Winnie the Pooh?
I wrote down Russian Winnie the Pooh would fit better in Nosgoth than non-Russian Winnie the Pooh would.
It's true. It's true.
Well, that's about it. Thank you so much, Alhazred, for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us where people can find you?
I am on Twitch at Alhazred's Gaming Goo. I am a variety streamer. I don't stick to anything for more than 5 minutes because I have no attention span. And you can also find me on Twitter at TC_Alhazred.
Thank you. And Richie, thank you for coming as well. Where can people find you?
Here.
Forever.
Oh.
Yeah, this is like I'm bound to this. It's like the Pillars of Nosgoth.
No escape, no life, no future.
Bound to this channel forever.